Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Tourism and Hospitality Service Management, SOTHSM, Bachelor of Arts, Facility and Services Management, BAFSM, Semester I, BFO-003 Basics of Facility Management, Unit-4 Real Estate Management, 4.0 Objectives. After reading this unit, the students will be able to understand the meaning of real estate sector, understand the types of real estate businesses and various environment protection laws in India related to the sector, define different types of lease and ownership in the real estate, learn how to manage portfolios in real estate sector, have an idea about the laws applicable. Permits and licenses required for real estate business in India. 4.1 Introduction. To answer what is real estate management, we can say it is the routine supervision of residential, commercial, or industrial real estate infrastructure. Usually responsibilities of real estate management include routine upkeep, maintenance and security of properties. Real estate management involves working for the owners of real estate assets such as residential and commercial buildings complexes, housing societies, business and shopping centers and industrial parks, etc. Today, the utilization of real estate management is aimed at various types of rental properties, including residential and commercial properties. The real estate management involve oversight of all rental operations as well as the preservation of the properties and also encompasses the buying and selling of the properties. A professional real estate management firm looks after all areas of their clients' properties, be it negotiating and selecting the tenants or collection of rent from them. Their work also includes evictions when needed and processing related paperwork as required by local laws. In short, we can say that real estate management is a one-stop shop for all the needs of prospective landlords. 4.2 Meaning and definition. Real estate is a form of actual property and can be defined as infrastructure which comprises land and its solid attachments, means it's something one owns and is a part of a set of a land. It can be used for various purposes such as residential, commercial and industrial purposes, and normally contains the water and mineral resources on the land. Real estate is included among the most valuable assets of the people and acquires more value with the passage of time. Appreciation in real estate is an indicator of sound economic health. Today, real estate market directly impacts a huge number of jobs worldwide. In its most basic principle, the real estate comprises a piece of land with some permanent infrastructure affixed to it. Land and building is an indicator of any nation's wealth in the world economy and has been among the most sought-after form of investment. India has become a real home of real estate business. The true boom in real estate sector in India came in March 2005 when Government of India allowed for 100% FDI in the sector. Real estate is playing an important role in our developing country in terms of shaping the future of nation. This industry has evolved in India into divergent fields. The growing economy plays a significant role to the development of real estate industry, which includes investors, realtors, developers or builders, agents or middlemen, purchasers and sellers. Acquiring real estate requires significant amount of capital. Real estate is very unpredictable and irregular in nature in terms of value and price. Most of the time, real estate players need to value the business and assist the progress of transactions. There are many forms of real estate business: real estate business, professional appraisal, valuation services, property management, managing properties for their owners, brokerages, guiding purchasers, and sellers in dealings. Move management, moving people or business to different locations. Development, improving land by adding new or replacing old buildings. Management in real estate sector involves setting a pricing policy, forecasting demand and managing supply for housing and commercial properties. 4.2.1 Understanding real estate management. The real estate industry contributes in economic growth and wealth generation in a huge way beyond the definition. This business also encompasses the development of assets, management of assets, owning, and selling of assets. The following are the typical works of a real estate management firms: managing day-to-day activities assigned by owners, preserving the worth of property while generating income, screening of tenants and filling the property with them, arrangement of necessary repairs and maintenance, preparing the lease documents and getting it signed by both the parties, collection of rent, renewal of lease agreements, drafting the budget for property maintenance and adhering to its provisions. Having a thorough knowledge of state and national laws and regulations pertaining to laws of tenancy, marketing properties, supervising other employees, handling taxes, buying and selling properties with the help of brokers, appraisers and other external parties. 4.3 Types of real estate management. Range of types of property is huge in this sector. Few real estate management companies have different fields of specialization to offer management services for different types of properties, while others can provide a complete range of services to a range of property types. The types of real estate management are discussed below. 4.3.1 Residential property management. Any property used for residential purposes. It includes the management of rental properties and the rental process. It usually covers single-family residences, holiday rentals, multifamily residences, villas and bungalows, condominiums, housing complexes, duplexes, cooperative societies. 4.3.2 Commercial property management. Any property used exclusively for business purposes. Commercial property management can apply to lodging properties, retail sector, malls, restaurants and gas stations, etc., offices, real estate brokerages or doctors' cabins, shared office spaces, hospitals, shopping centers, stores, theaters, grocery stores. Offices, parking facilities. 4.3.3 Industrial property management. Any property used for manufacturing, production, distribution, storage, and research and development. It includes heavy manufacturing plants like automotive facilities, medium and small manufacturing plants like foodstuff packaging factories, warehouse, logistic facilities. 4.3.4 Special purpose property management. This category covers various types of properties. Those are not covered into the categories above fall under this category, such as theaters, sports stadiums, resorts, old age homes, educational institutions, temples and other places of worship. 4.4 Environment protection. According to Article 48 of Indian Constitution, the state shall endeavour to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Government has imposed a number of legislations to control the pollution and for environmental protection. In our country, real estate significantly contributes to environmental pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. The development of construction sites creates huge amount of water, land and air pollution. Data of World Economic Forum reveals that, apart from contributing 40% of global CO2 emissions, the built environment is responsible for a massive amount of energy usage. Despite of a huge contribution to economy and employability, there is a need to promote sustainability and stricter compliances. Though, owing to growing awareness for environmental degradation, the sector is coming forward to tackle the threat of climate change, yet a lot needs to be done to achieve the desired level of compliance. Let's discuss the key legislations in India related to environment protection. 4.4.1 Environment Protection Act, 1986. This act was created and implemented by Indian government after adopting the principles of Conference on Human Environment by United Nations in June 1972 in Stockholm. This paved the way to implement India's promises for conservation and protection of environment. Overnight death of a huge number of people due to Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984 provided the real impetus to the process. Due to lack of legislation covering such tragedies, the people of the concerned company could escape, which agitated the public, ultimately spurring the government into action. The act is aimed at ensuring the environment protection, controlling environmental pollution, enabling the government agencies authorities to take strict action against the violators, raising awareness among the public for the deteriorating effects of environmental pollution. Provisions of this act allow it to take precedence over other acts, which means that the EPA 1986 will be given the highest priority in case of multiple legislation, including this act, are applicable for a committed offense. Salient features of the Environment Protection Act, 1986, EPA allows the center to take following measures for the protection of environment: coordination and execution of nationwide programs and plans, providing the mandate on environmental quality standards, especially related to the production or release of environmental pollutants. Imposing restrictions on the location of industries, examine and test the equipments and analyze the sample of water, soil and air or any other material from any place, set the regulatory standards for the limit for discharging environmental pollutants. Prior permission is required from the authorized government officials for handling prohibited hazardous substances. The EP Act empowers any person, along with concerned government officers, to file a petition in a court of law regarding any contravention of the guidelines given in the Act. 4.4.2 The Air, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, 1981. To control air pollution, there is a prescribed level for releasing particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, lead, volatile organic compounds, VOCs, or other poisonous material, and sources of air pollution like industries and power plants etc. have to honor this limit. The quality of air is severely affected by the exploitation of natural resources for manufacturing raw materials for construction. Construction sector is a contributor to global warming and climate change through huge emission of greenhouse gases. The Act was put out to conserve the quality of air and to ensure that the level of air pollution is under a controlled level. Objectives of the Act: avoidance, control and reduction of air pollution, formation of boards for the implementation of the Act at state as well as central level to empower the boards to implement the statutes of the Act. 4.4.3 Wildlife Protection Act, 1972. This Act prescribes strict regulations for protecting all wildlife, including both flora and fauna, and prescribes guidelines for declaration and notification of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. It provides necessary guidelines to formulate wildlife advisory boards. There is a ban on hunting of wildlife specified in Schedules I to 4 of this Act. Protected plants are included in Schedule 6. The Act was amended in the year 2002, which lays strict guidelines for commercial use of resources by local people. No infringement and construction of both commercial residential constructions is allowed on the places notified under protected areas. Forest produce are also redefined just to ensure better protection of ecosystems. This legislation strives to limit the encroachment into natural forest areas. 4.4.4 Water, Prevention and Control of Pollution, Act, 1974. This act aims to avoid, control and abatement of water pollution through preservation and restoration of fresh water and to prevent the contamination of water from domestic, agricultural and industrial wastewater. The Act is framed to evaluate the levels of pollution and make suitable provisions to punish the polluters. For effective monitoring of water pollution, pollution control boards have been set up by both the central government and the state governments. These boards are empowered to screen and remove the impediments to the conservation and protection of country's national water resources. Consequently, all the sectors which are highly water-intensive, including real estate, need clearance from these boards to operate. These PCBs are empowered and have been delegated necessary powers by the government to handle the problems related to water pollution. There is provision of penalties for the violators of the Act. 4.4.5 Hazardous Waste Management and Handling Rules, as estimated by the World Economic Forum. Out of total waste in Europe, around 30% comes from the real estate sector. The figure is quite similar to India. Hazardous waste is a threat to the overall health of the population and it has explicit ramifications on the value of the properties. This legislation provides ways for sustainable waste management practices, safe handling, treatment and disposal of hazardous waste, thereby creating green living spaces. These rules were first notified in 1989. They were then amended in 2000, 2003 and final notification was issued in 2008. Now these rules cover all aspects of discharge, handling and destruction of hazardous wastes. 4.4.6 Coastal Regulation Zone Notification. India has 7,500 kilometers of coastal line. Government of India regulates construction of tourism, infrastructure, buildings and other developments in coastal areas through Coastal Regulation Zones Notification. Notification issues guidelines on the types of developmental activities allowed based on their distance from shore. Government issued this notification in 1991 under Environment Protection Act, 1986 for protection and conservation of environment and ecosystem on Indian coastline. The notification was revised in 2011 and is amended from time to time on the basis of representations received from various stakeholders. Government formed a committee in June 2014 to look into issues of coastal states and to recommend required changes in the notification revised in 2011. The committee conducted a series of discussions with various stakeholders and in 2015 the chairman Dr. Shailesh Nayak submitted the report of the committee recommending appropriate changes in the notification. In December 2018, the Union Cabinet accorded approval to that draft notification. The Ministry of Environment, Forest Climate Change, MoFCC, then notified new CRZ norms in January 2019. The Act is administered by the Ministry of Environment and Forests. Climate Change, MoFCC. 4.4.7 Forest Conservation Act 1980. The Forest Conservation Act came into force in 1980 to control deforestation, which was further amended in 1988. It protected forestlands from being de-reserved without the permission of the central government. Act places the restrictions on states to de-reserve the reserved forests for development activities or for the use of non-forest purposes. The Act provides suitable provisions to penalize the people involved in deforestation activities. 4.5 Regulatory authorities. Following are the regulatory authorities related to real estate sector in India. Real Estate Regulatory Authority, RERA, the Ministry of Environment, Forest Climate Change, MoEFCC, National Board for Wildlife, NBWL, National Green Tribunal, NGT, Pollution Control Boards, Forest Settlement Officer and Coastal Regulation Zone Management Authority. Companies in real estate sector need due clearances from these authorities for any development plan. Environment clearance, EC, is essential to start a new project or expansion of any existing projects. The projects following the Green Building Rating considerations are given due priority for environment clearances. 4.6 Lease, 4.6.1 Definitions. In a simple term, we can understand that lease is a written agreement made between a tenant and landlord providing the tenant the legal right to either possess or make a specific use of the landlord's real estate and provide the legal right to the landlord to obtain an agreed upon rent from the tenant at the decided frequencies. Leases summarize the legal rights and obligations of both landlord and tenant. Most leases contain standard terms and provisions. However, they can vary depending on the nature of the property and the type of tenant. A lease can be defined as the relationship between the landlord or landlady and his or her tenants. Lease is a contract between landlord and tenant for a fixed period of time. This relationship between both parties arises when the proprietor of an immovable property hand over his property to a second party for a fixed period of time after furnishing a written agreement. A lease is a contract laying the guidelines where a lessor, landlord, transfers the usage rights of his property to a lessee, tenant. The contract allows the lessee to use the property for a mutually agreed period of time and make him bound to pay the rent to the owner for the agreed period. The landlord and the tenant have to follow the terms conditions of the contract and face the legal consequences if they fail to meet the contractual obligations. In real estate, there are various expenses in a lease which may occur either on the tenant's side or landlord's side. Typical lease expenses include insurance and taxes of property, repairs and maintenance, lighting, landscaping, parking lot etc., HVAC, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, electrical plumbing, carpet cleaning, gas, water, electricity, telephone, internet and other utilities, structural maintenance and roof. Calculating a cost to rent a property needs understanding of different expenses on both the landlord's and tenant's side. Following are few of the salient features of the leases. A. The tenant or lessee can't make any additional construction or dismantle any existing features in the building premises without informing and taking prior permission of the lessor. B. The lessee can't use the premises for any unlawful purposes. Even if the tenant wants to use the property for a different purpose than that specified in the lease deed, the tenant has to take prior permission from the lessor. C. The lessee can't sublet the lease to a third party or subdivide the leased property without intimation and prior permission of the lessor. D. In case of any breach of the contract by the lessee, the lessor can cancel the lease deed before the expiry of lease term. However, such breaches may be condoned after making payment for misuse charges acceptable to the lessor. 4.6.2 Types of leases. Different types of leases are used in different types of properties, but there are some commonly found leases in real estate sector. The important thing to understand for both the parties is the expenses covered or excluded in the lease, as every lease has different structure. Structure of lease usually depends on prevalent practices in the market and preference of landlord. Leases may be favorable to landlord or to the tenant depending on the distribution of expenses on both sides. However, a balanced lease is most preferred one. However, there is a similarity among all types of leases that there is a provision of basic rent and variable operational expenses to be paid. Some common lease structures are discussed below. 4.6.2.1 Full service lease or gross lease. A full service lease or gross lease covers most of the operating expenses. These expenses are covered from tenant's rent. These expenses include property taxes, insurances, utilities, exterior and interior maintenance, maintenance of common areas and janitorial, etc. Telephone and data expenses are few exceptions. Consequently, the base rent is on a higher side, but the tenant doesn't have to pay any other cost. Tenants prefer this form of lease for a variety of reasons like no involvement in day-to-day operations, fixed rental payment without any operating risk. However, the expenses aren't fixed, such as air conditioning bill in summers. Some landlords include a premium charge in the rent to take on these expenses and risks, which is a potential disadvantage, since this lease structure provides the landlords with proper control over properties, appearance and maintenance. They appreciate it. Escalation clauses that account for variable costs such as an increase of insurance or taxes are added by some landlords to include some flexibility in the lease. This type of lease structure is usually found in industrial, retail, office, freestanding properties or multi-tenant office buildings where the tenants use the shared utilities. 4.6.2.2 Net lease. The type of lease is very adjustable. In this type, the base rent is lower than that of a gross lease, but some fixed operating expenses such as insurance, taxes, items covered under common area maintenance, CAM, are paid by the tenant. Net leases have four subtypes. 4.6.2.2.1 Single net lease. In this type of net lease, tenants pay a fixed rent and share the property tax as decided with the owner. Building expenses are paid by the landlord, but the charges of utilities and other services are directly paid by the tenant. 4.6.2.2.2 Double net lease. It has many similarities with the single net lease, but under this structure the tenant is responsible to share a part of property insurance along with the property tax. Maintenance of the common area is paid by the landlord, but paying for own utilities and garbage services is still the responsibility of the tenant. 4.6.2.2.3 Triple net lease. It is one of the most accepted structures of lease. This type of lease encompasses usually three types of expenses: 1. Actual property taxes, 2. Insurance, and 3. Common area maintenance. These expenses are passed through to the tenant as an additional rent above the base rental rate. The tenants pay these expenses either in full or a part of them in addition to their base rent. A triple net lease or ANNN lease is used both in a single tenant and in a multi-tenant premise. In case of former one, the tenant controls the property's appearance by taking care of the landscaping and upkeep of the exteriors. In multi-tenant setup, any one tenant can't damage the property's structure, face, appearance for other tenants, as exterior upkeep is controlled by the landlord. Tenants in such a setup pay for their part of operating expenses. However, they are free to audit the operating expenses paid by landlord. Tenants typically pay for their utilities. A pro rata share for utilities is decided for all the tenants if they are not metered separately. Landlords are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of structural elements including roof of building, triple net lease favors the landlords as it safeguards their interests against rising operating expenses as the tenants also pay their shares. This is a favorable lease structure for tenants also as they are provided the facility to review the operating expenses paid by landlords, and any savings are given back to them. 4.6.2.2.4 Absolute Triple Net Lease. It's a magnified version of triple net lease. The tenant has sole responsibility of the building as he/she takes on all costs. This type of lease structure is usually found in case of buildings with single tenant on a long-term lease. Buildings are usually built considering the requirement or specifications given by the tenants. The tenant is generally a large corporation which is capable of and prepared to take on all the expenses. The benefit in this lease for large corporation is that they virtually own the building without purchasing it. 4.6.2.3 Modified Gross Lease. Modified Net Lease. Modified Gross Lease is a middle way for both the parties. In this structure, the landlord pays the insurance, actual property taxes and maintenance for common areas, whereas the tenant pays for his/her utilities, janitorial and maintenance of internal areas. It allows free negotiations for setting operating expenses, so the base rent is mutually agreed upon by both the parties. Like triple net lease, roof and structural components are usually the responsibility of landlord. Like in a triple net lease, the landlords are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of structural elements including roof of building. Base rental is also comparatively higher as the landlord is sharing more operating expenses. Lease rate remains fixed irrespective of any changes in cost. Lease rent is usually higher than a net lease structure as the owner is taking on more expenses. It's a favorable lease structure for both the parties as the landlord is responsible for managing and sharing the risk of many components of operating expenses. On the other hand, tenant has to pay a relatively fixed rental. However, the landlord may charge an extra premium to cover the risk of potential rise in operating expenses. 4.7 Ownership. In this section, we will discuss some common types of ownership structures in real estate. 4.7.1 Individual property ownership. Individual or sole property ownership refers to a property which is purchased and enrolled in the name of one person who alone holds the proprietorship title of it. The sole proprietor may have taken help from others in orchestrating assets for the purchase, but they have no right in the property if the deed is enrolled in his name. Advantages of individual ownership. The proprietor has full authority to sell the property. The purchaser doesn't require any consent from anyone else. In the event of death of the owner, it's easy to distribute the property according to the terms of his will. If there is no will, explicit legacy laws will apply, and the property will be divided among the legitimate beneficiaries of the late proprietor. 4.7.2 Joint property ownership. According to property rights in India, a joint proprietorship refers to acquired property which is enlisted in the name of more than one individual. The possessors of such title of properties are known as joint owners or co-owners of the acquired resource. The law doesn't differentiate between joint control and co-responsibility. It is appropriate to note that there is no difference between joint control and co-responsibility. Under any law, the two terms can be treated as equivalent. There are a few different ways to possess a property mutually. Joint property ownership has four major forms. 4.7.2.1 Tenancy in common. Under this type of property ownership, there is no specific mention of shares of co-owners at the time of purchase, or we can say that they do not have equal rights. These co-owners are tenant in common. They all enjoy equal rights in the joint property throughout their life. In the event of death of any co-owner, his/her rights doesn't automatically transfer to the surviving co-owner. The property is divided as per the terms of the will of the deceased co-owner. 4.7.2.2 Joint tenancy. The ownership is referred to as joint tenancy when each joint owner is given an equal portion of the property through the title deed of that property. Right of survivorship is the base of this form of ownership. In the event of death of any co-owner, his/her rights automatically passes on to the surviving tenant. Here a specific mention has to be included in the legal documents of joint property that the concerned property is owned as joint tenants by co-owners, otherwise legally the property will be treated as the tenancy in common. 4.7.2.3 Tenancy in entirety. This form of ownership between legally married couple is the simplest kind of joint ownership. In this type of ownership, the spouse co-held the title to a property. No change in share or sale of property is allowed without the permission of each other. In the event of death of a partner, total ownership of the property passes on to the surviving partner provided that he, she or the tenant in entirety also occupy the property at that time through a legal agreement and have same rights in the property. Tenancy in entirety comes to the end in case of divorcement. 4.7.2.4 Coparcenary. This concept of coparcenary form of ownership is provided by the Hindu Succession Act 1956 for the members of a Hindu undivided family. HUF. Every coparcener obtains an interest in a coparcenary property at birth. This form of ownership, which is pretty similar to joint tenancy, permits even an unborn child to have an equal stake in a HUF property. This concept, which is comparable to joint tenancy, permits an equal stake in an HUF property even to an unborn child. After birth, every coparcener obtains a share of the coparcenary property. In the event of death, his/her undivided share in the total property transfers to his legal heirs only and not to the other shareholders. Coparceners. 4.7.3 Ownership based on nomination. Nomination is a process where the specified asset is transferred in the name of the nominee after the death of the owner. Under this form of ownership, a legal owner of the property can give somebody the inheritance of his immovable property and other assets in case of his passing. Property nomination ensures the landlord that the property will not stay unclaimed or get subjected to litigation after he passes away. Nomination-based ownership is usually found in cooperative housing societies, where application for membership requires recommendation of members when someone applies for membership. In the event of owner's death, the property's title is transferred to the nominee by these housing societies. Once the title of property is transferred in the name of the nominee or handed over to him, the nominee becomes a trustee to hold the property on behalf of the legal heirs of the late owner and doesn't become the owner of the property. 4.7.4 Fractional ownership. Fractional ownership is the latest trend of investment in commercial real estate. Fractional ownership refers to an arrangement wherein groups of investors purchase a property from pooled funds. In this, the overall cost of a property is shared by a group of owners. Through this approach, the investors reduce their individual financial burden while purchasing a property and earn returns on their investment. The purchased asset can be either residential or commercial. It can be defined as a percentage ownership in an asset. Individual shareholders purchase the fractional ownership shares in any asset and enjoy usage rights, share in income, etc. Fractional ownership is used for high-value properties such as a vacation property where the owner can make personal use of the space and receives revenue when it is not used personally and is rented out. Usually a real estate management company arranges the fractional ownership and takes the responsibility of maintenance and upkeep of the vacation homes. 4.8 Real estate portfolio management. A real estate portfolio can be described as the collection of investment properties that are owned by an individual or a corporation. It's a list of diverse investment properties that are owned and managed in view of a monetary objective. These portfolios act as a detailed summary of all investments and financial transactions which help the real estate players to make calculative decisions. Real estate portfolio management is the centralized practice of managing assets owned by the client or an organization to achieve long-term financial goals. Real estate portfolio management is a necessary requirement for real estate investors and involves a steady review of individual property and its role in the long-term objectives and maximizing value to the organization. Managing the real estate portfolio require following steps. Strategies. 4.8.1 Clarify your business objectives. Different investments produce different results at different times, so before choosing an investment, the investors must first determine their end goal or objective for building an active real estate portfolio. The mix of investments in the portfolio and risk factors associated with them directly affects the overall income. The investors have to decide whether they want a long-term passive income or short-term profits. Setting the business objective helps the investors to choose the right type of investment and to formulate working strategies to achieve their target right from the start. 4.8.2 Regular assessment of portfolio. A routine assessment of portfolio allows you to evaluate and assess the performance of all your assets and take suitable measures for the required improvements and make financial provisions for real estate investments. It allows you to take proactive decisions on overperforming and underperforming assets as whether to hold on to it or sell it as per the market conditions. A regular portfolio assessment can help you to have a clear picture of the strength of your real estate investments, allocate your finances for the acquisition of new assets, reduce the operational cost, achieve optimum rental income. Track the performance of assets. 4.8.3 Allocation of budget. It's important to allocate a budget for operational expenses, property maintenance, property management fees, insurance, and gives you a fair idea about the funds available for investing purposes. Allocating a sufficient amount for unexpected emergencies is essential to handle last-minute problems. There should be proper allocations of funds for your expenses and for investments. Regular updation of budget helps to plan long-term wealth accumulation and protects your interests in uncertain or unexpected situations. 4.8.4 Asset allocation and diversification. This involves deciding the best strategy for asset allocation. Diversity in portfolio of assets gives you the best chance to reach the business goals and minimize the risk. The diversification of real estate investments will help you to achieve your targets. Rental properties. If you are looking for a steady source of passive income that appreciates over a long term, investors receive income in the form of rent collected from these properties. Commercial real estate. Commercial properties include the office building, industrial spaces, retail, etc. Owners can lease these spaces and earn a steady income. Raw or fresh land. It's a good option for long-term investments as it appreciates over a period of time. The land can be resold, given on rent, or be used for other commercial constructions. 4.8.5 Consulting the professionals. the final thing to decide a real estate portfolio is to determine how it will be handled. Owners can manage their properties themselves, but a real estate portfolio professional can help them to realize the value of the asset and the selection of assets to set a profitable real estate portfolio. Seeking guidance from a professional will help you to build a portfolio as per your needs and business objectives, streamline your property search, decide investments based on short-term and long-term financial needs, take effective budgetary decisions to maintain a positive cash flow. 4.9 Laws. Under this chapter we are going to discuss various laws, permits, licenses, approvals, applicable to the real estate industry in India. The following laws are related to the Indian real estate sector. 4.9.1 The Indian Contract, 1872. This law makes provisions related to the contract such as power to enter into contract, execution of contract, implementation of contract, rights of parties in a contract and remedies in case of breach of contract. 4.9.2 Transfer of Property Act of 1882. This legislation provides regulations for the transfer of properties in India. It encompasses provisions related to sale, lease, exchange, mortgage and the gift of both movable and immovable property as well as part performance. The law was enacted on 1st July 1882. Transfer of property has been defined as an act of conveying a property to a person or a group of persons by an individual or a group of individuals and a company. 4.9.3 The Indian Stamp Act, 1989. The purpose of this act was the consolidation and amendment of the laws relating to stamps and to make provisions to stamp duty payment. 4.9.4 Indian Registration Act, 1908. This act was enacted for the consolidation of enactments related to the registration of documents related to all immovable properties. Under the Act, registration is mandatory for some specific documents in order to avoid forgery of these documents. All properties purchased in India should be registered to safeguard evidence, decide ownership and prevent fraud. 4.9.5 Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, 2016. The Act was enacted in 2016 to establish RERA, Real Estate Regulatory Authority, to govern the real estate industry, to secure the interests of buyers and speedy redressal of disputes in real estate industry. This act regulates and addresses issues pertaining to delays in delivery of projects, pricing in real estate, quality of construction, title and other changes in a transparent and effective manner. Objectives of the Real Estate Act to ensure accountability towards buyers and protect their interest. Maintain transparency and fair play, thereby reducing frauds, delays. Pan-India standardization, ensure correct information from promoter to buyer, prescribing responsibilities for both promoter and buyer. Quick dispute resolution mechanism, foster confidence among investors by establishing good governance. 4.9.6 Foreign Exchange Management Act, 1999, FEMA, and Foreign Direct Investment Policy, FDI. FEMA was established to facilitate external trade and payments in India. Another purpose of Act is to help organized growth and systematic maintenance of foreign exchange market in India. This Act sets the mechanism for the sale and purchase of any immovable property in India by foreign corporations and NRIs. The unified FDI policy established the mechanism for foreign investment in rapidly growing real estate sector of India, as well as compliance and exit criteria for such investors. 4.10 Permits, licenses, approvals. For the construction of all the buildings, the developer needs to have few permissions or approvals from various competent authorities. Some important approvals and sanctions for building construction are listed below. 4.10.1 Encumbrance Certificate. It's a crucial document, serves as an evidence of free title possession of a property and required while purchasing or selling a property. Sub-registrar's office can be approached for this certificate. 4.10.2 Land Use Change Permit. A land use conversion certificate from agricultural to non-agricultural land is required for constructing a building for residential and commercial purposes on an agricultural land. In India, any kind of construction on an agricultural land is otherwise not permitted. However, a pan-India uniform law in this regard is not available, but each state has formulated its own rules with minute changes. The competent revenue authority, i.e., collector, SDM, Tehsildar, grants the approval for change of land use after ensuring the fulfillment of prescribed conditions. 4.10.3 Zoning Permits. Zoning laws govern the development of structures and use of land and are framed by local authorities in India. Land is segregated into various zones to ensure proper use of land for development purposes, such as zoning regulations framed to prevent the construction of commercial buildings in residential zone. There are different land use patterns in different zones. These regulations may also frame guidelines related to the limit of height of building, green spaces and type of commercial activities allowed in a specific region.
4.10.4 Building Sanctions and Approvals. Approval for building plan and layout is required from authorities under the provisions of Master Plan, Local Body Acts and Building BLOs. Building plan. A building plan has to be approved before the commencement of construction of building, and the construction should start within 2 years of sanction. No deviation is allowed from the sanction plan. Layout approval. It is as per floor area ratio, FAR, of floor space index, FSI, and has to be obtained before commencement of construction of residential and commercial buildings. IAD, intimation of disapproval, also known as a building permit, and states compliance guidelines during different phases of an under construction project. Completion certificate. It's an important document which states that the building has been built according to standards and proves the legitimacy of a residential or commercial building. Without this certificate, the building can't be sold by the developers. 4.10.5 RERA Certificate. A certificate from Real Estate Regulatory Authority is a legal document and serves as evidence that a property, project, or property agent has been registered under state-level RERA authority or tribunal. The certificate contains information about the real estate developer, property or building, and the real estate agent along with the unique registration number. The registration number is mandatory for the real estate agents to practice legally. No developer, builder, promoter, or real estate agent can advertise, book to sell properties without this registration certificate. 4.10.6 Air and Environment Clearance. Environmental impact assessment is a tool to assess the impacts of a new industry or expansion of industry. The purpose of an AIR is to determine the effects of a proposed development on the society, health and environment. Environment Impact Assessment, EIA, notification addresses the environmental impacts of real estate projects. The purpose of AIR report is to restrict the negative impacts of the upcoming project with alternatives and preventive measures. Environmental clearance monitors and minimizes environmental damages that may be caused due to real estate projects. 4.10.7 Groundwater Boring Permission. Permission for groundwater boring is required for commercial and domestic activities if a borewell for water extraction is being used. Central Groundwater Authority, CGWA, and State Groundwater Management Authority are granting permission to extract groundwater for commercial uses. 4.10.8 Fire NOC. All commercial real estate projects require to mandatorily obtain a NOC from local fire department of the respective state. It is issued after examining the fire assistance of building and the installed machineries for fire safety or fire handling. 4.10.9 Certificates from pollution control boards. The commercial complexes require installation of sewage treatment plants as they generate a huge quantity of wastewater. For their energy needs, they also install large DG sets for power backup. All this is required to be tested thoroughly by the laboratories accredited by pollution control boards. 4.11 Summary. Real estate industry is one of the largest industries not only in India but throughout the world. It is one of the major economic drivers of the country. It is second largest in terms of generating employment in the country after the agriculture sector. Millions of jobs are generated by real estate industry both directly and indirectly through its allied sectors. With the growing needs of a huge population on India, this sector is expected to rise in leaps and bounds. Real estate management requires thorough understanding of different types of markets in industry and their distinctive needs. Knowledge of day-to-day operational activities and a great sense of anticipation of the clients are keys to the success of any real estate management firm. These firms need to have a clear understanding of various statutory and legal requirements to operate the business in the most befitting manner. These firms are supposed to provide able guidance to the investors to manage their property portfolios in order to sustain in the market. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.